Hello, everybody, and welcome to the G4A show. This is episode 105. If you don't know me, if you're new here, my name is Jordan, your host. I'm always here now, apparently. And then every week I get joined by someone a bit different. And today, from my Xbox and me and my Twitter feed and everywhere else, it's Mr. Matt P video. How are you, Matt P?
Hello, I'm very well indeed. Spoiler alert, I have another Twitter campaign coming up soon, so I'm sure my ugly mug will be thrust onto your timeline once more without your permission.
It always is. It always is. It's like it knows that we're friends, so it sort of goes, yeah, okay, here you go.
You like this face. You can see more of this face.
You have not yet got an official nickname because people couldn't decide. There was a little bit of a conversation that happened, but yeah, you have not yet got one. So you are the man with no name right now.
Maybe that's the one that will stick. The man with no name. I'm okay with it.
This, of course, is your second episode as an official co-host of the show. So
Indeed.
How are you feeling about that?
I'm feeling great about it. You know, we did the first episode, the best Xbox game of all time. Spoiler alert, this week's episode, best PlayStation game of all time. Where do we go from here is the question.
Yeah, I know. We're kind of setting the bar of doing these lists now.
We've boxed ourselves in. I'm not wholly sure that I'm the qualified one to do best Nintendo games of all time. That's for sure. You've already done that, haven't you?
We have, yeah.
You did that a couple of weeks ago, of course, of course. So
we of course, somewhat predictably, spoilers, but we did decide that game was Breath of the Wild.
We landed on Halo, right? We landed on Halo as the greatest Xbox game of all time.
I think we actually landed on Halo 2.
I think you're right. Which I stand by. I think Breath of the Wild is a more contentious Nintendo greatest game of all time than well, maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, yeah,
it's all fun. Don't get too worked up about it.
And that's the thing, right? These aren't official lists. We're just going to kind of have some fun. We've both got a top 5. I'm sure some of that will cross over and we'll have some conversations. We're also going to talk about second party games because PlayStation have had a lot of those over the years as well.
Indeed.
And you know, they've just been around a long time, so there's a lot of very good games to talk about. But before we do that, as always, I think we should talk about what we've been playing. So Matt, what have you been playing recently?
Good question. I've been playing a lot. I can't talk about the thing I've been playing for the past week, so I won't talk about that. What else have I been playing? I've been working my way through Game Pass. So Emma, my fiance, had COVID one weekend, and so all plans got cancelled. We stayed in. We played through Escape Academy, which came to Game Pass, a lovely little co-op escape room game.
I haven't played that yet, but it looks cool.
It's brilliant. And I think, I've heard people say oh, it's better in single player. It's better co-op. I think either way to do it, I always have more fun in those sorts of games in co-op. And so that would be my recommendation. What else do we play? We played Tell Me Why. We caught up on that from a long, long time ago. Phenomenal game.
I really liked that game a lot. Yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere. I remember it sort of, because I heard a little bit about it, of course, but then one day it just randomly dropped on Game Pass, and it was kind of oh, okay, I'll play this, and it was actually really good. And I think, especially the subject matter that they're dealing with in that game, is super powerful, really. 100%. And I think it's the right style of game to deal with something like that.
Yeah,
in a way that's meaningful.
I think it came out sort of at the tail end of kind of Telltale's reign of those types of games, and so I think it kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit when it came out there. But like I say, it's on Game Pass. If you've got Game Pass, absolutely must play. It's phenomenal. And then along kind of similar-ish lines, kind of not really. Road 96 also came to Game Pass, which is a game that came to PC last year.
Interesting.
And it's just come to Xbox and is fantastic, phenomenal. Loving that game. Me and Emma playing through that together and totally engrossed in that game. Fantastic. Nice.
Well, if you've been following the channel for a while, and maybe you're following us on our new Twitch, which is G4A Live on Twitch, I've been playing only 2 chapters over there so far, because doing live streams when you have a proper job is hard.
Sure.
Yeah. But I've been playing As Dusk Falls, and I love it. I think it's brilliant. Yeah. Good. I think it's a brilliant game. I think so far it's it presents itself in a unique way for the genre. It feels very much like an interactive comic book or graphic novel because of the art style. And the art style, I wasn't sure on going into the game. I was kind of like, oh, this might be a little bit weird because some of it is kind of 3D, rendered, and then it's drawn graphics essentially. And it's like stop motion kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But because it's a narrative driven choice based game with QTEs, that doesn't matter. And it does literally become, you are basically reading a comic book and then making choices. It's basically like a comic book. And what I love about the Twitch integration with it, maybe it's one for you to stream, Matt, is you can actually set it up so that the chat can vote on choices.
Oh, that is cool.
And they can override you, but you can also override the chat. So it kind of goes both ways.
That's a really neat idea. Stuff. Is that only integration through Twitch and not live streaming other platforms like YouTube?
I believe it's only Twitch. Yes, I believe it's only Twitch, unfortunately.
Step up your game, YouTube. Figure it out. Come on. Astos Falls is one of those ones that I've been avoiding streaming and stuff like that because I know it's so up my girlfriend's alley, my fiance's alley, sorry. And so
and there is up to 8-player co-op with it as well. Yeah. So, and people can actually play on their mobile phone. So, say you've got some friends around for the evening, you can have them download the app on their phone, and then they just put a code in and they make the choices on their phone.
How long is it though?
I don't know. I've heard 4 hours.
Okay, that's not too bad. I played. What was it? It was one of the first PlayStation. Like they did that campaign, right, where they had like got all these games you can play on your phone. Essentially, it was a murder mystery.
I know the one you mean. I just can't think of what it's called.
No, it's spoiler alert, guys. It's not making our top 5 PlayStation games of all time list.
It was one of those that was like really big for a moment in time when they were pushing
it hard. Yeah,
when they were pushing.
Anyway,
this thing.
It was a murder mystery. It's exactly the same sort of format. And we did that with 8 friends in a room. And it was brilliant. But yeah, it took like 6 hours or something to beat. So I was like, oh, we're in here all day.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. Like I'd rather those things be sort of 2 to 4. It's difficult.
Well, from what I know, this game is about 4 hours long, and I also know that narrative. I don't know too much about it yet because I'm early in the game, obviously.
Sure.
But it does span over multiple decades. So,
interesting.
So they've done something interesting with the story there, and it also, what I love about it, without giving too much away, is it's the most grounded of any of these choice-based narrative games that I've ever played. Like. It feels like something that, like I could imagine this happening in a movie. Do you know what I mean? It's so the basic setup, if I can't, I don't want to spoil too much, but this is kind of the basic setup, is you play as 2 families. One of them is moving across the country and they, for whatever reason, they have to stay at this motel for the night. And then the other family that you play as have just robbed the local sheriff's house, and they also end up at this same motel, and that's kind of where I am in the game right now.
Right.
And obviously they're intertwining, and choices you make as one family are affecting the other family, and then choices that you get to make as that family. So it's really interesting how they do it. And, they do the typical thing, like if you've played Detroit Become Human or any of those kind of games, at the end of the chapter, they show you all the choices, but they actually also do this really cool thing that I haven't seen before, where they make it clear to you, even when you're making a choice, that choice is a crucial one that will actually change the story in some meaningful way. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so it doesn't just change that chapter you're playing.
Yeah, I think
the story going forward.
Some Telltale games have done that, like with super big choices. Typically, at the end of whatever chapter it is you're playing, it's like A or B, and it looks quite different to normal choices.
Yeah,
but most typically just tell you after the fact, right? Like I remember the butterfly in Until Dawn appearing or whatever to be like, you done fucked it, kid.
Yeah. So I've really been enjoying that. Obviously, what I've played of it so far. And other than that, to be honest, I haven't played too much, but my Steam Deck did arrive yesterday. And so I've been tinkering around with this beast that I have over here. And it is a beast. I mean, look at the size of this thing,
Huge.
It's just but I'll tell you what, it is more comfortable to hold than a Nintendo Switch.
Well, there we go. Big bonus points.
It's something about the weight distribution and just the way that the grips are. Like, they have a nice feel to them. It doesn't feel too heavy, even though it's big. The weight is good on it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of usability is the way I would describe the Steam Deck. People can use it for emulators. They can use it for their Steam library, and Steam does a very good job at telling you which games run well.
Yeah.
And I just think, I think some people ahead of time were a little bit worried. Oh, maybe this is going to be another one of those failed Steam devices that no one really pays attention to and doesn't really mean anything for gaming. But this isn't that. Like, this feels like something that will actually have an impact on what other devices decide to do in the future.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the way that people are talking about it online as well. I think honestly as well, the way that they've sent them out has helped them. Like just the amount of conversation on Twitter of like, I got the email. Oh my god, I'm in the next match. Whatever. I think that's actually really helped them and kept people talking about it. Mm-hmm. I played with one around launch a couple of times in the office. Really impressed by it. But it does that thing for me where I'm just like, I'm a simple man, okay? I don't want to have to worry about whether or not you've got your control setup sorted for this Steam. I don't want to worry about whether or not this game's verified for it or not. Like, so much hassle. Don't love it. And when I was playing it, at least, I found the download times on it really slow. I don't know whether it was the network I was on or if the Wi-Fi chip in it isn't great or whatever it is. I don't know. But there were a couple of issues I had with it. But then I was still like, oh, I don't know. Do I get a Steam Deck? I was very much in that camp of like, maybe I'll get one if it goes on sale. But then for my birthday, I got a Razer Kishi.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And now I'm like, dude,
do you actually need it? Yeah. Do you actually need it?
I use this thing I've used it almost every night since I've got it, either streaming from the cloud or streaming from my PlayStation or Xbox. And it's phenomenal.
So I actually have a Razer Kishi as well that I got with my phone upgrade about a year ago or so.
That's a good little device come with it.
Is brilliant. Like, it's a brilliant device that, especially in the age of Game Pass, and xCloud as well. If you know Matt, he's over on Xbox podcast very regularly. So
look, I'm super blessed in the cloud gaming has works great for me here in my flat.
And it won't work for everyone, right? It won't work for everybody, but yes, in the time, especially even in your home, to be honest, because you can now stream, like, both consoles, Xbox and PlayStation, allow you to stream from the console to a second device. And there is actually a lot of use cases for that people wouldn't think of. Like, maybe you want to sit in a different room and play your game. I know when I was playing Yakuza Like a Dragon, the last 10 hours of that game, I played exclusively on my mobile phone. And it was just because it's a turn-based game that was easy to play on phone, but I would stream it from my console and I'd sit downstairs with my family and watch a movie or something at the same time, And I think people don't think about those kind of use cases for these types of devices. And going back to the Steam Deck, there's a few people I know that sort of canceled their pre-orders because they were like, oh, where am I really going to use this? Like, I play on PC at home.
Yeah.
My PC is more powerful than this Steam Deck anyway. What is the use case for me? But I think what you have to remember is you might go to a friend's house and you might want to be able to kind of carry on playing your game or whatever it might be. You might be traveling, like for me, sometimes I got to go on the train to London or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's a couple of hours that I can play a game
for sure.
Do you know what I mean? And that's the one advantage that maybe the Steam Deck has over these kind of cloud devices right now, like your mobile and stuff.
Yeah, that you're offline, 100%.
Is native, right? So you can download a game, and to the downloading time kind of point, at least on my Wi-Fi, I downloaded Days Gone. That was kind of the first game I was like, I want to see if this can run Days Gone. It felt like a good test for it, right?
Sure.
And that's a 52 gigabyte game, and it took around 18 minutes. So,
wow. Well, yeah, I think I was on a pre-release unit as well, so like,
of course,
it could have been updated and everything since. But I remember that standing out to me. But yeah, like you're absolutely right. Like the massive use benefit for the Steam Deck is that you can play offline, and also you can do everything that I'm bragging about on the key sheet on the Steam Deck as well, right? Like you can stream your PlayStation, your Xbox to it. You can use
and
gaming.
That's the thing. There is absolutely a little bit of because there is a desktop mode on the Steam Deck. Okay, that's something that people may not realize if you haven't got one yourself, because it's not that much talked about, but you can use it for web browsing, YouTube, etc., all that stuff, right? You could do all that stuff on it still, because it is basically a handheld PC. But what I think they have done is, because they've got the dedicated game mode on it, they're getting quite good with controller presets, for example. So I set an emulator up on there last night, and I'm playing some PS2 games, because I have a huge PS2 library, but I no longer have a PS2 console. So I'm kind of just, taking my games and putting them onto there now.
Sure.
And it basically, like I don't even need to think about what the buttons are. They just are what they are on a PlayStation controller.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so I think they're getting better with that stuff, because they realize that stuff is what's really going to sell the device. If they make it easy to pick up and play your library of games without having to tinker too much, then it's going to be a good thing, right? It's kind of like with they've got the frame rate limiter on there, and you can adjust. Like, people have been talking about the battery life and stuff like that, but actually you can go in there and significantly impact the battery life by turning down the power that the machine is using and things like that. So it's not, some people are a little bit scared of a machine where you kind of have to tinker with it to get the best out of it. But I guess my message is, you don't have to tinker with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And like you say, it's still early days for this device. It's been hugely adopted. People will make it easier. Like, it will just become a part of development now. However big or small you are, you put a controller layout in there, because somebody might be playing this thing on Steam Deck.
And let's be real, not only that, but like, the fact that this thing can run what we would see as AAA games from devices like PlayStation and Xbox, it's like the Switch can't do that very well a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So that is an advantage for the Steam Deck. And obviously it's a much more expensive device. That's something to bear in mind. But I do think there's an audience for this thing outside 100%. Of just your traditional PC gamer. I think there are people who like to play on handheld devices that would love this device.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And there are definitely those people out there, but the people out there who are the hardcore PC gamers log into their Steam account and have all of their games right there ready to go. And like, that is a huge deal, right? Like, buying a new console and having 1,000, however many, how many Steam sales have you gone through?
That's ultimate compatibility, right? And yes, not all of your games are going to work perfectly.
Sure.
Some of them they haven't even tested. Some of them, are playable, but they'll have a little kind of mark there to say this, you may need to tinker with this to get the best experience. But that's a PC thing anyway. So if you're a PC person, you know how to do that, right? You know how to go into the settings and kind of be like, oh yeah, I can turn this down and this down, because certain settings on a screen of that size, you don't need high anyway. This is like a 720p screen. You're not gonna see certain things anyway. So turn a few settings down and you can get some good performance out of this thing. So yeah, I'm very pleased with it so far. Like, it doesn't, I was a little bit concerned, because I was like, it's a lot of money, and is it really going to be worth that money? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Because you start to kind of build up these expectations of, am I going to be able to do this, this, and this? And then when you kind of figure out, oh yeah, I can literally do everything I could do on my PC. This thing is, from what I can tell, it's essentially it's essentially matching what a Series S can do. Obviously, it's not necessarily doing ray tracing, but in terms of performance on the games, it seems to essentially be matching a Series S, which for a handheld device is crazy. Like that's crazy, you know. And I hope the one thing I really hope for that I do think would take this device to the next level is a native Game Pass integration. They do that, and I don't care, you know, if Microsoft, if you're listening, pay whatever you have to pay and get Game Pass on this device, because it then basically becomes your handheld. So you are then, not only are Steam going to benefit because more people are going to buy the device, you know, Valve are going to make so much money if you do that, because people will buy the device literally just to play their Game Pass library.
A huge selling point.
And you're going to probably get more subscribers if you do that, you know? So,
well, also, like, I remember when I was playing it, like I say, in the office and playing God of War, because it just come to PC, and was like, this is brilliant. This is such a cool, awesome way to play this game. And I haven't played it since it launched, and it's just reminding me how great this game is. And so, and PlayStation's never going to have a handheld again. Well,
probably not. Probably not.
But that does remind me of a game I want to add to my list, which I think should count, but you might have problems with it. But yeah, anyway, we've talked about Steam for long enough, haven't we?
We have. We should talk about some PlayStation games, and you know, God of War, I'm sure, will come up later on. So that was a good little one to end the Steam discussion on. But now let's talk about some of the best PlayStation games ever. This is, of course, just our opinion. So, you know, I don't want to see fighting in the comments. Just, you know, I don't mind a friendly suggestion. Let's shout out some of the games that you love as well. But we're allowed to love the games that we love.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about, Matt, I feel like we should talk about second party first. Because there are so many second party games over the years. And if you're someone who maybe you don't know what second party means, and you've just kind of come across this video and you hear that, you hear those words all the time, second party, first party, and you're not really sure what they mean, all it really means is the studio that made the game isn't owned by PlayStation.
Yeah.
That's all it really means. So an example would be, for me, Death Stranding. Right, because Death Stranding is an IP that PlayStation own, and it's a game that they published, but Kojima Productions is not owned by Sony. And yeah, I love Death Stranding, so I feel like that one's worth a shout out as a kind of one of the better second party games they've had over the years, because it was a divisive one, but I think it's fair to say that the people who liked it really liked it, and and that's all you really want with the game, right? Is if you can capture an audience, then you're winning. And Kojima seems to do that every time. So yeah, Death Stranding for me would be one of the first kind of second party games I think of when I think of PlayStation.
Yeah, and picking back off that, I never played Death Stranding, but Metal Gear, I like the franchise as a whole, right, needs to be chatted about. I think like you say, Kojima is kind of
so
iconic.
Synonymous with PlayStation, right? Like, especially Metal Gear 4, especially. So Metal Gear 4 was a full exclusive to the PlayStation 3, and still lives on that hardware. It's stuck there, unless you have a Steam Deck, of course. Maybe you can do something to make it work on a Steam Deck for you. But yeah, like, so yeah, I mean, that's another one that for a long time was a PlayStation exclusive, right? Like, I think like the original Metal Gear Solid was obviously on the PS1. Then you had the couple of PS2 Metal Gear games, and I think they later in the Xbox 360 generation did come to Xbox. So they did make their way to other platforms, but for 2 generations of console, they were fully exclusive to PlayStation.
Yeah.
So
and there are certain games out there as well, like even if they're not exclusive, you just think of as PlayStation. And like for me, Metal Gear is a PlayStation franchise, right? Like, and even like you say, Kojima is a PlayStation guy up until very recently when he's announced he's doing an Xbox exclusive game, which came as a bit of a shock, right? Or not that much of a shock because it's been leaked and rumored for.
But if it wasn't, that would have been one of the biggest shocks ever, right?
Exactly.
Because of his connection to PlayStation. So yeah, absolutely. And I think they've got, and we'll talk about some of the companies later on, but they have some companies that they clearly have very good relationships with because they are basically, they're almost first party without officially being first party. Do you know what I mean?
And it's that kind of almost like Japanese business culture as well, right? Like the Microsoft have always talked about wanting to get bigger in Japan, and this Kojima Play is how they're going to do it, apparently, as well as bringing a whole plentiful of JRPGs to Game Pass and stuff like that and trying to attract people in. But Sony has always had the upper hand in Japan. And it's stuff like Kojima and Metal Gear and the relationships there and the Persona games and all of those sorts of things that just feel inherently PlayStation.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So what is one of the second party games that you would shout out when you think of PlayStation?
Sure.
And you think of a second party exclusive, what would it be?
It's a tough one. I got a few on the list. So I don't think this was exclusive, but again, it's one of those ones that just I so vehemently associate with PlayStation, which would be Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2.
Interesting. And I mean, the timing on that is interesting as well, because obviously the PlayStation Plus game for August, one of them at least, is Tony Hawk 1 and 2.
Exactly. And that's probably one of the first games I remember, Tony Hawk Pro Skater
and
2 specifically.
To be fair as well, I think that may have been one of those similar Metal Gear situations where those games may have been exclusive for a while and then come to other platforms slightly later.
Something in my brain tells me they were on Dreamcast as well. Or one of them was.
Interesting.
But nobody had a Dreamcast, and so nobody played it.
I did. So I feel a little bit offended. Yeah. That is actually my favorite console of all time.
Wow.
So
I mean, ahead of its time.
I mean, to be fair, the reason it is my favorite console of all time is because it is the home of my favorite franchise of all time, which is Shenmue. So
wow. Okay. We're learning a lot about Jordan today, ladies and gentlemen. And in 4 weeks' time, you can tune into the greatest Dreamcast game of all time conversation.
that isn't happening.
That's a short episode. That is a short episode.
Not enough games.
It's me going, it's basically all shit except for Tony Hawk, and you going, Shemu's great. And that's the end of the episode. So you've enjoyed it in the middle of this.
But yeah, so in a more traditional sense, though,
sure.
If I was to push you on
steer me in
one that is kind of full exclusive second party game, I know there's one you want to shout out. So just do it.
There is only one correct answer, which is Bloodborne. It is like literally one of the greatest games of all time, and it is Sony exclusive.
And one of the only exclusives from last generation for Sony that I didn't play.
Have you never played Bloodborne?
I've never played Bloodborne. Never even loaded it up.
Jordan, mind you, you couldn't stick through Elden Ring and stuff, right? And you're not a big Souls guy.
No, but I do want to play Elden Ring because I enjoyed it. So I think my thing is I would just rather play those games with friends, and I've never had anyone to play them with. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Bloodborne, I would say, of all of the Souls from Software games, there is something about the solitude of Bloodborne that I think is kind of important to that. Well, I don't know. Play the game you want to play, enjoy it the way you want to enjoy it. Yeah. But the world of Bloodborne, I think, is the best thing that From Software.
I will say I've obviously seen a lot of it, and everything I've seen, I go, oh, this actually looks great, but I've never played it. So maybe it's one that when they finally do some sort of remaster or whatever, one day.
If it haven't come yet, mate, is it ever going to come? I don't know. But
you never know with PlayStation, right? Like sometimes we wait 20 years for something to happen.
Sure.
So who knows?
A Bloodborne 2 announcement would be my go ballistic, throw the laptop out the window.
Interesting.
Absolute madness. Hype moment.
Well, I mean, that was the Shenmue 3 moment for me that PlayStation got to announce that one. So that was like, I think we all have those games, right? Like, regardless of platform, just as a little tangent, we all have those games that speak to us on some sort of personal level. And Shenmue, like, it's literally a game, Shenmue 2 came out in 2001. And we knew there was more to the story, right? Because it was always, even back then, it was talked about as a game that had 12 chapters to the story, and each game was a certain number of chapters. And yeah, it was weird because it was like 18 years. So Shenmue 3 released 18 years after Shenmue 2.
Yeah.
But it was announced like 15 years later. And that doesn't happen very often, right? So that was a moment for people who love that franchise. Like, I know people who were literally in tears and couldn't believe it was a thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, with it being a Kickstarter, it literally broke the internet. Like,
yeah,
it was a weird situation. So yeah, I understand with Bloodborne, I feel like that is one of those PlayStation games where people just love it. Like, it's a beloved game. And I think, yeah, if there's ever a sequel, or I think in a way, even a remaster of some kind, people would go nuts, right?
Or Sony keep badgering on about how they want to extend their IPs beyond gaming. Give me a fucking Netflix anime Bloodborne.
That would be amazing, to be fair. I'd would be amazing. Shit up.
That'd be amazing.
Any other second parties you want to shout out?
I had one, and then I Googled it and realized they're owned by Sony. So they're getting upgraded to the next list, which I didn't know.
Interesting. Okay.
The only other thing I had in here, which again isn't exclusive and isn't second party, but something I so associate with PlayStation, is Tekken 2 and 3 specifically.
Yeah.
I remember playing them so much as a kid, and they're my first sort of fighting games, and so very, very fond memories of those.
And isn't it funny as well? Like, that's something we will talk about later when we talk about, because we're also going to talk about the future of PlayStation. But they have such a strong past to the point where they made you associate games with them, even if those games were nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Tomb Raider for a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much anymore, but for a long time, Tomb Raider, people thought it was a PlayStation game. They literally didn't realize they could get it on other platforms.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. Like, I think Nintendo have a similar effect in that way on certain things. But it's crazy to me that these companies can get so much from just the way they market things that they almost brainwash you, like, not in a negative way, but they trick you into thinking, yes, this is where you have to be to play this thing. And that's crazy. Like, one game, and this isn't a PlayStation game at all, but it's a game that I got on PlayStation because I associated with PlayStation, and that was the first Destiny.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think the most recent example of this is Destiny 2. And then lo and behold, they go buy Bungie. But I remember all the marketing around Destiny 1 and 2. Yeah, you're right. If you weren't as involved in the industry as we are, or into it as the people listening are, you would have very easily assumed that was a PlayStation exclusive game because they were pushing it hard.
I guess that shows the power of marketing, right? So, talking about marketing, they spend a lot of money marketing first-party games, and they're marketing them in new ways now with these movies and TV shows and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the best first-party PlayStation games of all time, because we've kind of both made lists for this one, sort of. So
sure.
If I was to ask you to give me your number 5 best game, what would
really
it
order
be,
them. I didn't really order them.
Come on, on the fly, number 5. What's it gonna be? Okay.
Okay, I don't know which one.
Okay.
And they were only relatively recently acquired, so I guess I have to say the latest Ratchet and Clank game. But really, it's the Ratchet and Clank franchise. And again, it comes back to that. The second party is a first party now.
And I mean, to be fair, because PlayStation own those games now, I would classify any of those games as first party.
We can put it up there. But Ratchet and Clank for me, was like I played every single one of those games that they released, from good to bad to ugly. And now I feel like, Insomniac is just killer at the moment and just can't be stopped.
I personally have never vibed with Ratchet and Clank. I've tried a few times, and I did like what I played of the most recent game, but I only got about halfway through it, and then I was like, I don't know if I need to play any more of this. Like, do you know what I mean? The story doesn't really grab me enough. The gameplay is enjoyable, but because I don't have a pre-existing connection with that franchise, it's always been hard for me to now get into it as an older person, right?
Sure.
Because I think if you're into it from when you were a kid, you're always going to be into it.
Yeah.
But I didn't have that. I don't know. I just wasn't playing those kind of games when I was a kid.
No, that's fair enough. And I think one of the reasons I love it so much is that one of the first games I remember playing on PlayStation was Spyro. And Spyro is like awesome, but definitely targeted at kids. And Ratchet and Clank felt like I'm an adult now. Like, it's Spyro, but it's adult humor, like adult humor in quotes, because it's not really adult humor, but it's adult humor, and it's guns, and then blowing shit up, and it's crazy, and it's goofy, and it's funny. And so it just felt like that step up from Spyro to me.
Yeah, Ratchet is kind of like Shrek, right? If you equate it to like a movie,
yes, that is
it's basically
good.
Shrek.
Yes.
Which is, it's still for kids, but it has something for older people in there as well.
Has an edge.
Yeah. It's interesting that an Insomniac game is your number 5, because my number 5 is Spider-Man.
Oh, it's so much higher up my list, but yes, go
Spider-Man. For me, the reason it's number 5 is just because I have many, many great games on my list, and it was kind of like I wanted to get it in somewhere because I feel like, it was an amazing game to play, and I liked that original Spider-Man story where they weren't really like, obviously they were taking inspiration from the comics, but they were telling their own story within that world, and that was cool. I actually think it's one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. I think it was that good.
Yeah.
But I just think that for me, there are games that I enjoyed more, or that I think are just better, kind of without question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, but I wanted to get it on there because I feel like that was the moment as well for a lot of people where, and maybe, like, I'm not trying to put Insomniac down here because they've been a great studio for a really long time, but that was the moment where people paid attention to Insomniac. Do you know what I mean? They did this Spider-Man game, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, Insomniac aren't messing around anymore. Like, they know how to make great games.
That's only because Sunset Overdrive was stuck on a bullshit console and nobody played it.
I agree.
Because so much of that DNA is there, right? And it's what is this game about? It's
and
about
they've said it themselves. And obviously this is a very different conversation, but it's one that's worth having while we're talking about Spider-Man, is if Microsoft and Xbox were in a different place at the time, Spider-Man might have been an Xbox game. Like, we've heard the reports that they were offered to make a Marvel game, and they would have, it could have been anyone of their choice. And at the time, they were the ones with the working relationship with Insomniac Games. So could Spider-Man have been their game? Probably, but
maybe. I mean, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors, right? But I have a feeling somebody at Sony feels like they own Spider-Man. Like, literally one man
like
feels
an actual
like he owns Spider-Man at Sony. And he will not let that thing go for love nor money.
For sure.
Unless
But do you know what?
Gives him all the money.
In the long run, it worked out great because
100%.
Spider-Man is an amazing game, and Miles Morales is also an amazing game. Doesn't make my list, but is also an amazing game.
Can we not give them the same spot? Can we not put them on? They're being packaged together for PC at the moment.
They'll both go at number 5 for me. Then I'll be willing to do that. So
they're in my number 2 spot.
Jesus, man, Jesus! Why are you giving people spoilers?
Oh, sorry, sorry.
Spoilers. You know what number 2 is for Matt now, so we'll talk a little bit more about them later, and then we'll decide between us maybe where they should go. But Matt, what is your number 4?
Let me take you back in time to Shadow of the Colossus. What a phenomenal game.
I'm glad this one came up. So I never finished this game, but I have played it. I never finished it. It was
so much better when you finish it.
It was one of those where I kind of played out of intrigue just to see. Do you know what I mean? Just to kind of see.
It's one of those things, like they did the remaster of it, right? And they were like, no, we don't need to change any of the controls. And then you play it and you're like, no, you really needed to change the controls. Like, tighten this thing up, please, God. But it's phenomenal. Like,
I do get it, and I'm glad that this game came up, because as someone who's played on PlayStation for many years, probably about 20 years now, really, because the PS2 days were where I really started with PlayStation, even though I played a couple of games on PS1. Like Shadow of the Colossus was one of the games that I always heard about. Do you know what I mean? It was one of the games that was always spoken about as, this is one of the best games on PlayStation. So I don't think that's even up for debate, really. I think pretty much any list you find of best PlayStation games, Shadow of the Colossus is going to be on there.
Yeah, and this is the one I was referencing when I said I didn't realize that they owned Team Ico.
I didn't realize that either.
But it makes sense, because then they did and I can't remember the name of the game, but it was one of those ones that got
Last Guardian
that got announced, and then 10 years went by and they went, oh yeah, we'll put this out now, even though it's subpar. But whatever. Shadow of the Colossus is, I never heard of it. I was young, right? So I wasn't like keeping up with the industry like we are now. And so it was just out, and my cousin had it, and I went round and he was playing it, and I was like, what do you mean that they're just these giant bosses? You don't fight anything else in the game. It's just these bosses, and it's just about exploration and kind of figuring out what's going on in the world. And for me, I guess thinking about it now, is kind of like my first taste of what a Souls game would be, right? It's that idea of adventure and figuring out what's going on in this world, and kind of loneliness, and like how you deal with that in a game, and the scale of it. You know, fighting these Colossus. I don't think there's anything that's done it as well.
And especially at the time of original release as well, like what they actually achieved was incredible, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, it's one of those games that will always be talked about. It has its place in history, and rightfully so, and that's why it has to be on this list of best games. You know,
Agreed.
like it just has to be, without question. So I'm glad you have it there at your number 4. For me, where do I want to go for number 4? That's a question, because I didn't order my entire list either. So I had a couple that kind of, I knew where they were going to go, and then after that I kind of struggled. So give me a second, because I need to take a look.
Okay, we can vamp. I'm scared because I just remembered a game that isn't in my list. And now I don't know who made it, which is shame on me, quite frankly. And now I'm scared that I'm not going to be able to fit it in on the list anyway without knocking something else out. And I'm terrified, Jordan. I'm scared.
Why are you scared, man? Just do it. Just do what you got to do. So for me, I think...
Oh, God. Go on. Sorry.
I think at number 4, and this is just because this is a Jordan-ass video game, right? Ooh. This is like... This game felt like it was made for me, right? People can say what they want about it, but I genuinely think it's a great game. And that is Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah. Didn't make my list, but was in the 5 to 10 zone. Easily.
I get that. And that's the thing, right? Like, I get it. Like, I know that some people would probably have Horizon Zero Dawn in this slot. I know that some people would have a few other things here, but yeah, for me, it's just something about Ghost where it was like, I love Japan, right? Like I'm kind of enamored with Japanese culture and
Sure.
especially samurai culture. And to see that brought to life in a video game in the way that it was in Ghost of Tsushima was amazing. And I also think they did some things that no other game has done before, right? In terms of the way that you kind of navigate around that world, the way that the wind shows you where to go and animals lead you to collectibles and all this sort of stuff. It was amazing. Like it was an amazing game to play. And of course, you can have the criticism of, oh, it was basically just another open world game. And I know that some people kind of say it was the Assassin's Creed game that we never got, right? Some people have that thing on it. But it's like, yes, it was all of those things, but it was also a game that actually told a really good story.
Yeah.
And had characters that I cared about.
Here's a hot take for you. It's better than any Assassin's Creed game.
I agree. I agree with you on that. So...
I'm glad, because we're gonna have to fight everybody else on the internet now. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And like I say, it didn't make my list, but it was close. But you're right, like about it, it just tells a phenomenal story. It knows exactly what it's doing. Like, and you're right, and it's not just like, oh, we're making a video game, so we're gonna give you a waypoint. No. We're gonna make you follow the wind, because that's thematically so much fucking cooler in every single way.
Yeah.
And just more fitting and brilliant.
And it's just like, also the other thing is it was a love letter to Japanese cinema, right? In many ways. And you know, they had the kind of Kurosawa inspired mode with the black and white and everything. So they knew what they were making and they knew how to make it. And they, you know, it was incredibly successful in Japan. And I think sometimes, especially for Western developers, because this was obviously a Sucker Punch game, they have to be cautious about what they do when trying to represent somewhere that they're not from, right?
Yeah.
But from everything I know, from all the feedback that they were kind of given from Japanese media and Japanese experts on that time period, the feedback was amazing because they represented it as well as they could in the game, right?
Yeah.
And they were also able to deal with this historical period of something that actually happened, but then put their own story inside of that as well. And I can't wait to see this franchise continue, which it inevitably will, because it was one of the first projects that they actually then said, oh yeah, we're going to do a movie. Like that was super quick after the game. It wasn't, you know, they're doing obviously like the Last of Us TV show and all these kind of things. And it's like, so you think, oh, maybe Ghost of Tsushima will have to wait a while because it's a new game. But actually it was one of the first projects they announced as crossing over to movies. And that's because of the story that exists in the game. Like they know it's a good story.
Yeah.
And they know that because of the way the game was, it's one that's very easily translatable to the movie screen because it was basically a movie that you played.
Yes.
You know, so
yeah, even to almost its detriment at points where like the you know the big struggle of that game is how much do you go against the samurai code in order to save the people you love or your community. And one of the complaints of that game is that actually it doesn't make any difference. Like if you could go through that whole game playing as sort of pure good samurai boy and it wouldn't make any odds, people would still call you the ghost and all those things would still happen. So
absolutely.
But you're absolutely right. Like everything you said is spot on about it. And also what I would say is it's a game that goes above and beyond, right? In the sort of, was it 3 months, 6 months after launch? They were just like, here, have a multiplayer mode that is
for free. Yeah.
Phenomenal. That is like a whole new game. Like they could have packaged that and sold it or made it its own standalone thing, even like Last of Us Factions is apparently.
Absolutely.
But they didn't, right? And it's just a game that goes above and beyond and it's phenomenal. And if you have an OLED TV, if you're lucky enough, you owe it yourself. Just go play the first hour in its special Kurosaka mode because it's so sexy.
Yeah.
So sexy.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. So, what is next on your list? I believe this is your number 3, Matt. What have you got?
It is my number 3. So I just looked. The game that came to my mind absolutely is owned by Sony. It's made by Santa Monica, which I had no idea, and another company. And so I'm going to put it on my number 3 slot. Well, I'm going to shunt Spider-Man at my number 2 slot because we've already talked about it. Everybody knows spiritually Spider-Man exists in my number 2 slot.
Okay, so we'll all just remember that in our minds.
Yeah, exactly. Okay? I'm just getting a top 6 out of this at this point, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. So in at number 3 is Journey. Journey's phenomenal.
I didn't know that Journey. So I knew obviously Journey was an exclusive, and I knew the relationship there. I knew it was a published game. I didn't realize that they owned it, which is interesting.
And now I'm scared that they don't, right? It's that game company, but it says here they're owned by Sony and they were helped by Santa Monica. Well, so I'm going to count it.
Yeah. Well, we'll count it then. I mean, that's a contentious one.
Sure.
Because it may not be the case.
But we have to talk about Journey.
But also it may have been one of those things where at the time that studio may have been owned by Sony and they might not be anymore.
Or vice versa. So, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Journey's phenomenal. PlayStation exclusive. Did something.
You know, Journey is a game. So Journey is a very interesting game for me because I love the music from that game. But I heard the music before I ever played the game.
Mm.
And then I decided not to play the game because someone spoiled it for me.
Jordan, the game's called Journey. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. You can't spoil Journey.
So are you telling me I should play it?
You have to play Journey.
Okay. I will go and play it. By the time Matt is on next, I will play Journey. That is so within 4 weeks, I will play Journey.
Well, it only takes you 2 hours, so bang it out. But yeah, it is phenomenal. And I almost had more fun. So I played Journey and then made my now fiance at the time girlfriend play it. And almost had more fun watching her play it. It was brilliant. It's such an experience. And
also it was one of those, right, where when you think of PlayStation, this was one of those games where, okay, maybe it wasn't that big AAA thing that everyone knew of ahead of time, but it was one of those PlayStation games where people were like, if you have a PlayStation, you have to play this game.
Yeah.
That was the conversation around it. And it was very much, we've spoken about it before, but a moment in time, right? It was a moment in time where everyone at that time was playing that game if they had access to it. So...
Yes, exactly.
And it's so, yeah, I don't know. That represents to me what Journey represents was a creative, risk-taking PlayStation.
Yeah.
Where they would just do things because they were cool and they weren't necessarily trying to make the most money in the world off of every single game that ever has been made, so I'm glad you brought it up.
It's pure art. That's what it is, right? And it's phenomenal. And you're absolutely right. It was a risk-taking thing at the time, I'm sure, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I guess, but I'm sure this wouldn't have qualified for Game of the Year awards because it would have been in the DLC section. Remember when they used to do that for
Wasn't
Xbox
it?
arcade games and stuff?
I was going to say, because this was essentially a PlayStation Network game, right?
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a very unique, phenomenal experience. And it's about the journey, Jordan. So it doesn't matter that you got to spoil.
And also, if you have never played it, don't read about it and just go and play it.
100%. 100%.
So, I mean, I know, even as someone who hasn't played it, I know it's one of those games that I should play. Do you know what I mean? So that kind of says a lot about it. And yeah, go and play it and go and enjoy yourselves. As Matt said, it's not a long video game.
No.
I now want to take us back down the road a little bit to 2001 because I want to talk about a game that I think was crucial to PlayStation at that time and probably one of the biggest franchises in the world at that time, and that is Gran Turismo 3. I believe is one of the best games ever for PlayStation because that was a game where people bought PlayStations to just play that game.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't necessarily happen as much with racing games anymore because it's just changed over time. What racing games are now essentially very, very good tech demos. They are there to demonstrate the tech that these consoles can now use. But at the time in the early 2000s, racing games were the thing. Like they were, it was kind of before first person shooters on console, really. And racing games were one of the main genres of game that people would play. And GT3 was probably the best one at that time as well. So I had to shout that out because obviously they had a new GT game recently and the kind of reception of that was a bit mixed. But without GT3, I don't think PlayStation would be where they are today. And I think...
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I've never been a big GT guy. I've never been a big racing game guy, really, to be honest with you, barring sort of Crazy Taxi. But that doesn't really count, does it?
I love Crazy Taxi, but unfortunately, it doesn't count for today's conversation.
But we will talk about it in 4 weeks on Best Dreamcast Games of All Time. I've lost my train of thought. Yes, I've never been a big GT guy, but I agree 100% with everything you're saying. Yeah, it was synonymous with PlayStation. Like if you owned a PlayStation back then, you had to have GT, and I'm sure I did. I'm sure I played it. I remember.
And do you know what? Do you know what the funny thing is? I was thinking back to it when I was making this list. I was thinking back to playing that game, and I think how crazy is it that back then people looked at these racing games and they went, "Oh, this looks real." Like people genuinely thought they looked real. And now you look at racing games and compare them to what we had back then, and you're like, oh my God.
I always remember whenever somebody talks about this, I always remember playing Medal of Honor with my dad, and the mission right at the start of, I can't remember which Medal of Honor game it is, but you come into the D-Day beach landings.
Yes, yeah.
And my dad going, this is incredible. It's never going to look better than this. And like, I would love to send him a YouTube video of what that looks like nowadays. And then put Forza on or Gran Turismo or whatever.
It's crazy. Like it is crazy how far we've come, but I wanted to bring up GT because I just felt like it was a crucial game to PlayStation's success. And it was a very good game. Like I'm not bringing it up just because it was crucial. It was at that time one of the games to play on console.
Definitely.
And I just feel like maybe sometimes people forget about some of these older games and don't give them the respect that they deserve. So I think as far as PlayStation first party games go, that is one of the best ones. And it's one of the ones that really has allowed them to have this long kind of storied history, because GT has been one of their franchises that's always been there, right? Like talking about it as an overall franchise, it still exists today.
Yeah.
It's not something that just kind of appeared once or twice and then went away. Like they know what GT means to their audience. And that's why they don't get rid of it, even when it doesn't perform necessarily as well as they would like. Something like GT Sport on the PS4, didn't do well at all. Didn't have a good critical reception. People didn't really enjoy the game, but they didn't say, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of the franchise, because they know what the franchise means to their audience.
Yeah,
and I think
100%.
I think GT3 is the kind of pinnacle of that back in the early 2000s. So I had to bring it up, and it had to be on my list here.
Love it.
What else have you got? You've kind of said goodbye to Spider-Man. He's swung off into the distance. So what have you got at number 2 now?
And number 2 now is The Last of Us Part 2.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm gonna, before we say anything,
go on.
I'm gonna say that my number 2 is The Last of Us.
I knew it. I felt it in my bones. Well, why don't let's, to be canonical, let's go Last of Us 1 first. Let's chat about Last of Us 1 first.
Okay. So Last of Us 1 is a game that I played later. Okay. I played it a few years after it released. Obviously I played the remastered version on PS4. But being able to kind of think back to when Last of Us released, at the time, I don't think there were any other video games like it. Like, I think it did something that people didn't know video games could do. And that was a mature, very deep and dark story about humanity, right? Like, the story was about humanity. And that's why it was so relatable. And that's why every time we're in this world, they kind of push us. They push us to think certain things and feel certain things that we don't necessarily always want to feel. But, you know, it was like, even playing it years later, I kind of said to myself, yeah, this is one of the best stories ever in a video game. And that says something, right? That you can play a game 3-4 years after it originally released, and it's still doing something better than most games are doing it. Especially with how technology moves. And it's like, of course, that game is getting its remaster kind of remake version soon. And if you haven't played it and you've got a PS5, that's probably going to be the best way to play that game.
Of course, yeah.
And you know, I'm glad that it's going to be more accessible to more players with the accessibility options and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
Because it's an incredible, incredible game. And I've obviously played both. We'll talk about Last of Us Part 2 in a minute. But when I was kind of ranking one or the other, I looked at it like this. Last of Us Part 2 doesn't mean what it means or doesn't achieve what it achieves without Last of Us Part 1, whereas Last of Us Part 1 as a standalone individual game is still great, and it doesn't need Part 2 to be great, whereas I feel like Part 2 does need Part 1. Does that make sense?
Totally. I totally agree with you. And it's the same conversation we had 4 weeks ago about whether or not Halo or Halo 2 should take the biscuit, right?
Yeah.
A very similar conversation anyway. And yes, I agree with everything you're saying. I think for me, the story is one of the greatest that has ever been told in video games, and sort of catapulted acting within video games to another level.
And you know what one of the things was as well that I forgot to mention there when I was talking about it is like, it's the fact that it made you play as someone, and then at the end of the game, you questioned whether you were actually the bad guy.
Yeah.
Right? You questioned yourself. Was I the bad guy in this game?
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. The second game can't build on any of that in the way it does without the first, right? And so you're absolutely right. I think the first is a significantly better package with the Left Behind DLC. Is something that, well, maybe not, maybe significantly is a strong word to put in there.
It also had a multiplayer that people loved. So let's put that one in there, you know, as
very
well.
true indeed. But yes, I totally agree with everything you're saying, even to the point of there's a section in the game we're allowed to spoil side parts of The Last of Us, right?
At this point, if you haven't played it, kind of, you know,
this is also
Matt
very
will pat his head
to the game.
when Matt will pat his head when the light spoiler is over.
Sure.
Okay?
When you go into the sewers and you read all of the notes from somebody who's come before and kind of piece together their story.
Yeah. So the environmental storytelling in the game was excellent.
All it did was took something that Resident Evil's been doing for years and destroy Resident Evil by doing it so much better than Resident Evil's ever been able to do it.
And do you know what? You actually touched on something that is a reason that for me, you know, and again, it goes back to that thing of, it's like the chicken and the egg, right? You can't have one without the other.
Exactly.
But
fried chicken is better than omelets.
What Last of Us did for gaming as a whole is more than what Last of Us 2 will do for gaming as a whole, I believe.
Really?
Because of the impact it had on performances in games and the way that those were captured, and because of how it impacted the stories that were then deemed as, oh, okay, we can do this kind of story in a game. And that was the moment for me where gaming was no longer seen as, oh, it's just a kiddie thing for little kiddie geeks, right? Like, that's not what gaming is anymore. And there are people that I know who got into gaming because of that game, because it was a more adult focused, very serious story. And yeah, I think that that sort of moment for gaming only happens once, right? And that doesn't mean that Last of Us 2 won't have an amazing, massive impact. That's not what I'm saying, just to be clear. But I think in terms of overall gaming, not just inside one genre of game, I think Last of Us 1, Part 1, had a bigger impact, most likely, than Last of Us Part 2 will have. So
Yeah,
come on, Matt.
I
Talk to
don't
us.
disagree
Talk
with
to
you.
us.
The reason I think Last of Us 2 has been done slightly dirty by just the insane conversation around it. Like you know,
And
I
a lot of
almost
jumping on the bandwagon as well.
100%. I almost equate it to like occasionally you'll see people say like, "Oh, I don't like the MCU Spider-Man because he's not very good at being Spider-Man. Like he fails." And I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like you're just that doesn't make any sense that like you don't like this film because the protagonist of the film has problems." It's like, what are you on about? And so
yeah, isn't that a deeper character?
Exactly. And so like that's the way I feel like a lot of people talk away about The Last of Us Part 2. It's like, Joel would never fall for that. It's like
let's have a proper Last of Us Part 2 conversation for a minute. Because I love this game. Just to be clear, I love Last of Us Part 2. I do have a couple of issues with it, which you can see in our spoiler cast from time of release. It's on our old YouTube channel, Game for All, that you can find. We obviously now live on Eat Sleep Game, so please subscribe there. But one of my main problems was the pacing. I think the pacing, as far as for a video game, I do think the pacing is bad. But I don't think they can tell the story they tell in the way that they tell it without having the pacing they have, because I think you lose so much impact. So light spoilers here for Last of Us Part 2, when you go through those 3 days again as the other character,
yeah,
you build up a relationship with that character that you don't necessarily expect to have. But if they didn't do that, and if it was paced differently, you wouldn't feel the way you feel come the end of the game.
Of course.
Do you know what I mean? So they had to do what they did in terms of pacing, but pacing was my main issue with it. My issue wasn't about the story they told or whatever. Bigger spoiler here, sorry people, for Last of Us Part 2, but obviously they kill off a certain character. And when they do that, I think that was some people's problem, right? Because in gaming, I think gamers in general are very used to games having to be this thing where it's like, we only do what the player wants and we're not trying to upset them.
Yeah.
This is basically a hobby for them and we are trying to just make them have enjoyment out of these things. And that's not what Last of Us Part 2 was trying to do.
I also think there's a inherent gaming culture issue where dying in a game means you suck at the game. And so even though you have no control in that moment, because you've played as that character in the first game for 20 hours or whatever, it's like, oh, now you suck. And now you're dead. And that's your punishment. You died and now the game's over for you.
And do you know what I actually saw that moment as? That was the moment where it was like, okay, anything can happen in this world.
Exactly.
And it doesn't matter who you are. We don't care. We don't care how much you love someone, because this is about a story that we want to tell. And we believe in this story. And that was the point for me where I was in. I was like, oh, okay, I'm in, because you can do anything.
It's the reason people love the good seasons of Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the exact same thing. And so I totally agree with you.
And don't get me wrong, I get being upset when a beloved character dies and all that kind of stuff. And I get why that would upset people, right? It's kind of like, spoilers for Avengers, but it's kind of like when Tony Stark dies, right? But the guy dies saving the day, and it adds depth to his character that has been built up over a long, long period of time.
Yeah.
And the death in Last of Us Part 2 affects both characters that you play as.
Yeah.
And their depth of character because of that moment that happens and the things they go through because of that one choice that was made is what makes the game. Like,
yep, 100%.
So let's not be negative all the time on these kind of things. And I do think that's one thing that Last of Us Part 2 did that no other game has ever done, is kind of open up this idea of a game doesn't always have to be about pleasing the player. And sometimes it can just be, we want to tell a story and this is the story we're telling. I think I heard Neil Druckmann talk about it at one point, about how even when they wrote the story and when they were kind of going through it, they knew that they were going to lose some of their audience by some of the narrative decisions they made. But they chose to stick with those decisions because it was the story they wanted to tell, and it was the story that they felt was right for the world, right? And I think that when you think of PlayStation right now, that is one of the games you think of for sure. And Last of Us as a franchise is probably the franchise that you think of in terms of PlayStation.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, a couple of things on that. Like what you said is absolutely right. As far as story goes, I think it's also a direct reaction to Uncharted series, where people are like, oh, Nathan Drake's a fun, lovable character and a mass murderer. And they're like, you know what? You're right. Let's actually think about that for a second and make it real. Probably too real in some circumstances in Last of Us Part 2, but hey ho. And then what I was going to say is everything you talk about in Last of Us Part 1 in how it elevated the industry as far as acting goes, which I totally agree with you. This did for accessibility.
It did, yeah.
One of the first games to come out and just like really nail accessibility to the point where, you know, say what you will about them remaking The Last of Us Part 1.
But part of the reason is because of the accessibility, right?
Huge.
Like, and that is one thing that I want to kind of mention on remakes while we're on the subject, is sometimes a remake isn't about selling it to the existing audience.
Yeah.
Sometimes a remake is about, how do we open this up to a brand new audience? And it's not there. Yeah, okay. Some of them are literally just trying to make money from you, but there is a reason this remake should exist. Yes. Like, yes, you could argue, could they patch those accessibility features into the already remastered game? Potentially, but you don't know what difficulties that would have made, and could they have broken the game by doing that? You know,
the money thing is a different conversation, isn't it? Because like, yeah, should you be paywalling that accessibility? I don't know, but hey,
absolutely. But yeah, like I'm never gonna be against kind of redoing a game when you're opening it up to so many more people. Like exactly. I know people that could not play the first game because it was not accessible to them, and now it will be. So that's a great thing. And then
the only other thing I was going to mention is I think it's and maybe people don't give enough credit, maybe they do, and I'm just not paying enough attention. It's such a huge step up gameplay wise, and like I mean, the reason that I haven't put the reason that I haven't put an Uncharted game in this list for me is I don't think the gameplay in Uncharted is that good. As far as the sort of echelon of third-person shooters goes.
I mostly agree. I actually think Uncharted 4 plays well.
I agree. It plays well. But I don't think it's like phenomenal. No, oh my God, I'm having a lot of fun.
Whereas Last of Us 2 was kind of phenomenal, right?
Incredible. Yeah.
Because of the animations and all that kind of stuff. Like,
the environmental stuff, the level design, everything. It's top notch.
So I agree. So I feel like these are two games really where we can both agree that they're basically both in the same slot here.
You weren't willing to give Miles Morales and Spider-Man the same slot, and so I agree.
They take number 2, and it's kind of 1A. It's kind of 2A and 2B.
Sure, let's do that
in this situation.
I agree. So then, coming on to our number 1 pick, should we just say it both? We don't know what each other's pick, but we do know what each other's pick. Should we just both say it simultaneously?
Okay. Do you
3,
want to?
2, 1.
God of War.
Yeah, of course.
2018 to be very clear to people.
Oh no, I was talking about yes, of course. You go. We can gush about this for hours.
So I think without question, God of War, regardless of PlayStation or any other platform, is one of the best video games ever made, let alone just PlayStation games. And I think it did so many things so well, right? And not even just well, it did so many things great, to the point where it was the one game I played and I sort of finished it and went, what would I change about this game? And I had to think for ages of small little things that I would change. And sure, there are things I'd change because no game is perfect. But this felt like the game that got closest to perfect. Like, it was a phenomenal game to play. One is they reinvented the entire franchise just by changing the gameplay of the game. Mm-hmm. They gave a character more depth, and they made you care about Kratos in a way that you never have before. And to be able to do that with an already storied franchise that people loved, and take the risk of reinventing it in that way, because if it didn't pay off, it kills the franchise, right? Like, if it didn't pay off, God of War is dead, and we never ever see a God of War game again. Mm-hmm. What ended up happening was one of the best games ever made, and we can talk all we want about 2018, about it potentially having two of the best games ever made released in that year. But yeah, it was just unbelievable to play from every single aspect. The acting in it, the story, the gameplay, the no-cut camera, that they did some very neat tricks to keep it as a no-cut camera.
Yeah.
There, so the technological things they did there are amazing. The way it looked, like, it was a great looking game.
Yeah.
And I have pretty much nothing bad to say about it, and there are not many games where that's the case.
Yeah.
So I think there's no question that this is the best PlayStation game ever.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, everything you said. And I think for me, I've never been a God of War fan. I've never finished any of the God of War game, dabbled in them very lightly. But for it to even hit me when you go back to the house and get the weapon that moment, right? The floorboard,
yeah.
For that to hit me and me to give a shit about that, like, what an achievement this game is. That, like, somebody who's barely dabbled in the franchise really cares about this story.
And what I also really actually loved about it is the story isn't complete, and it's the first game ever, really, where they literally feed you an incomplete story, because they clearly have a plan of where they wanted to go with that narrative, with these characters, right? And what the story was really about was growth of a character, and this character connecting with his son over this journey they were taking. And that is a deeply personal thing that everyone can relate to, right? Like, yeah, okay, Kratos is a god, he's a killing machine, but he's got so many human qualities, right? And it's something that people have gone through with their dads. Like, they've had hard relationships and they've had to kind of reconcile over some bad circumstances sometimes. And so I just think being able to tell a story that is that human and that grounded in that fantastical world, and have it all mean something and all make sense, is amazing. Like,
yeah, making it all make sense is the thing that is the real achievement, right? Like you say, caring about going back to get that weapon, but also the fact that, like, we're establishing a new world that this character that people know is in, and how has that changed this person?
They literally they changed his mythologies, right? Like, like, how crazy is that? Yeah. Like, that doesn't, even that, when you first start playing the game, doesn't really make sense. And then it's like they make it make sense through the course of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And the Senua did it a little bit as well, but I think Senua did it worse, which, that's not really a fair sort of statement. But Norse mythology is not easy to get your head around. And they kind of play with that in this, right? That, like, oh, no, that's not true. Or, like, that's not the way it went.
Yeah, not everything is the way that you think.
Exactly. And so I'm so excited to see what they do with the next game.
Absolutely.
So
and we don't have long to wait, right? Like November 9th. And I'm sure that it's going to be there at the end of the year, battling Elden Ring for best game of the year this year.
I didn't even think about that.
I'm a bit you know, I'd be surprised if it wasn't in the conversation, because even if this is one of the things about God of War, right? This is how good 2018 was. They can literally have Ragnarok just have a new story, but be exactly the same game, and it will still be great. It will still be great. Like, it doesn't need to be wildly different. Look, that's how much they nailed it.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think, you know, we've harped on a lot about the story, but you're right. The gameplay is like so incredibly fun. Like
throwing that axe, right?
So satisfying. And then for them to build that, right? And for that axe to be so incredibly fun and intuitive and engaging, and then to throw another weapon at you and for it to be just as fun and engaging and a whole new layer, and to keep layering on that with different combos and stuff you can switch out and armor sets.
And
Brilliant.
Also the other thing is, just kind of before we move on, because I do want to talk before we end about the future of PlayStation, but the other thing is being able to reinvent the franchise while also not disrespecting what came before, right?
Yeah.
Like, they tie it in a very meaningful way, and when you go back to get the original weapon from those original games, that means something. Like, that moment, they make it feel big for people who haven't even played those original games.
Yeah.
So they make it mean something. And like you said, to do that and have literally to have weapons signify kind of this changing moment for a franchise, but then do both of them great justice in gameplay terms is incredible. And that's the whole thing about this. Like, I know that some people may kind of think, oh, why is God of War Ragnarok such a hyped up game? We've seen like a little bit of gameplay from it. You know, someone who's maybe new to the PlayStation ecosystem or new to gaming or whatever, they might not understand. Yeah. But the reason it's so hyped is because of how much they nailed the first game in 2018. And it doesn't happen that often. You don't get games that are that close to perfect usually, you know, like.
Yeah. And even like we're talking about games that go above and beyond, this goes above and beyond, right? Like God of War, although a very kind of streamlined single player story game, has an end game. Like it has Muspelheim that you have to work your way through and is procedurally generated. It has the Valkyries, a really engaging extra bit of story and just engaging gameplay loop for you to play at the end and get better.
And a world full of mysteries, right? Like that's the other thing is there are almost Metroidvania style aspects to this game where you can't get to certain areas before you have certain things and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really good world to explore as well. It's not, but they somehow managed to do that while also having this very linear story. And that's something we don't see often in games, right? Being able to have this very open game that is able to also tell a story in a linear way that kind of makes sense for going through the world and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't say I can't say enough good things about it, right? Like, and I have nothing bad to say about it, really. Like, if I was saying something bad, I'd be nitpicking.
Yeah.
And there's no point in ever doing that. So yeah, what about the future of PlayStation? Because we, of course, spoke about God of War Ragnarok coming in November. On the kind of second party / third party front, they had a bit of negative news recently, which is they, of course, had the KOTOR remake kind of exclusively to their platform, but it sounds like that game might now never come out. So that's kind of a big loss for them.
Yeah.
So, but we have heard, of course, about them potentially going after some different styles of games over the next few years. So how are we feeling about the kind of future of PlayStation as it looks right now?
I have no idea. Like you say, we've got God of War on the horizon. People are going to be excited. It's going to be great, I'm sure. Of course, that is still coming to PS4. We haven't really, I don't think, maybe Gran Turismo is this, but seen a real example of like push the PS5, really push it. Yeah. Perhaps the thing I'm most excited to see what comes next from PlayStation is PSVR 2. But even that, to me, feels dated before it's even out. You know, they bragged about how it's only going to have one cable. It's like, all right, well, we've got Quest. So we're already in the cableless future. What are you doing?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
PlayStation for me kind of, goes in these kind of peaks and troughs of hubris of the PS3 when that got announced and how expensive it was going to be, and they'll be like, people will get a second job to buy it. Was a thing that somebody from Sony actually said.
Yeah.
And for me, the PS5 kind of feels like that hubris coming back. That
Interesting.
That PS4 generation was so dominant
that maybe so you're saying like almost like maybe they're kind of a little too confident in themselves about certain things.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen some signs of that, of course. My concern right now, just as a gamer, is after God of War, we don't know much, right? So after God of War, we know that Spider-Man 2 is meant to be next year, but then how much do we really believe them on that? Because they said God of War Ragnarok was meant to be last year. And, we've seen with delays of games what it's like right now. Like, I think this game development is very clearly changing in terms of how long games are going to take and that kind of thing. And some of that is the impacts of COVID, but also some of those impacts of COVID are lasting, right? We've seen game studios now kind of transition to remote working and all those kind of things. And those things are not negative, but they will impact the way that games are made. And that will change the timescales on things. And it will mean probably a few more years of lots of delays.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but that's how it kind of is. But yeah, after like Spider-Man 2 and obviously the Wolverine game they kind of announced, and there's obviously a couple of things that we could guess, right? But we have no real clarification on them. Like it's such a different situation for them right now, because in the PS4 generation, it felt like with PlayStation, we knew everything all the time, right? It felt like we knew everything all the time because they communicated so much about everything, and they would announce some games years ahead of time. Like I think Ghost of Tsushima was announced 3 years before it came out or something like that.
Sounds about right.
And they just haven't done that this generation. This generation, they've played everything very close to their chest. And I think part of that is obviously confidence in what they have, because they know that they don't have to show some of these things so early. For example, when Ghost of Tsushima 2 gets announced, I'm probably going to buy that game without ever even seeing it. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing, because that is the faith and trust that PlayStation Studios have built up over time. But at the same time, when we hear things like, oh, they're looking at potentially 10 live service games in the next 4 years, it's like, okay, does that mean they're changing direction? Does that mean they're giving up some of their single player powerhouses in order to kind of follow this multiplayer trend? Who knows? And it is a little bit concerning. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because I do think that for PlayStation, as someone who's gamed on PlayStation for a long time, I think that for the last probably decade or so, multiplayer has been a weak spot of theirs.
Yeah.
It has been a place where they have lacked, because they focused so much on these single player AAA powerhouse experiences that they kind of lost variety in their catalog. And if we look through PlayStation's history, they have a lot of variety, and they actually have a lot of history with great multiplayer games as well. But they don't have that right now. So I understand them chasing that stuff. But 10 live service games in 4 years sounds like a lot. Like that to me sounds like you're kind of throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that one of them works.
Yeah, I agree. And the talk about branching out and them acquiring Bungie specifically because they think Destiny is a franchise that works outside of gaming. Great, sure. Destiny 3 will be a big deal for them, I guess, when that gets announced. If it gets announced, like, it's one of those live service games. Destiny 2 is expected to live for a long time. It's already been out for a long time. So I wouldn't be massively shocked if a Destiny 3 isn't super far away, but still probably 3, 4, 5 years.
For sure.
And so, yeah, you're right. It's a weird time for Sony at the moment. And I think as well, they've, again, talking about that hubris and stuff, they they watched Game Pass for a long time before they did anything about it. Perhaps too long, perhaps not. I don't know. But it's becoming clear that it's a David and Goliath fight now. Microsoft are really spreading their wings now, throwing around the cash, buying up the studios, pushing out their services.
I would love to know, and obviously this isn't about PlayStation, but I would love to know one day what was the moment with Microsoft, because they've obviously been in the game for 20 years, right? But what was the moment where they went, oh yeah, we should actually really invest in this now? Because it never felt like they did before. Yeah. Before, it kind of felt like a side project that they didn't really care too much about. We know that they nearly shut it down in 2015. Like they nearly shut down Xbox. And then a few years later, somehow, magically, someone persuaded the guys with all the money to be like, yeah, if we invest money in this in the long run, we can actually make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think that's changed, obviously, the industry in many, many ways. And some of those ways are going to be negative and some of them are going to be positive. And PlayStation are going to keep doing their thing, right?
Yeah.
And they're good at doing their thing. They've always been good at doing their thing. But it is scary from PlayStation when we don't hear things. And I think right now we're in the kind of land of not knowing, right? Like they haven't had an event this year where they've really talked about what the future of PlayStation is. And that's a little bit concerning, because in some ways that will make people start to wonder, do they even know what the future is themselves? Do they even know what games that they should be confident in right now, or where their services should be heading right now? Or are they trying to still figure these things out? Because we've seen them invest in studios like Haven, and they've picked up a few kind of brand new studios.
Yeah.
And those studios, I have no doubt, are going to make some great games. But tell us a bit about them. Tell us what you're kind of aiming for. If you are doing these 10 live service games and they're coming over the next 4 years, surely we should start hearing about those things.
Yeah.
And it is a bit concerning, but I think that, PlayStation clearly know what they're doing. And I think they have this knack of kind of never leaving things too long and always knowing when knowing when they have to make a change. And I'm not saying they have to make a change right now, but they need to start communicating better. I think that's the one thing I would say is, as a PlayStation gamer, they need to communicate to their audience better, because that was the thing, especially in the PS4 generation, that they did better than anybody else. And they're not doing that now.
They've got the arsenal, right? Like they've got Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, Insomniac. They have the big hitters. They have Spider-Man. They have Last of Us. They have all these franchises that you know and give a shit about. God of War is the game I'm most excited for. But like you say, what else is there then?
Yeah, like at the moment, all we know about is two Insomniac games. And one of those, we don't even have a year release date. We know that Spider-Man is next year at some point. Maybe. That's kind of what they're aiming for. Wolverine could be 3 years away, so what's coming in between all those things? So hopefully we get an event from them soon, and if we do, we will cover it on the show as and when we need to.
Indeed.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode, because it's been good to talk about some of these amazing PlayStation games, and there are of course many that we haven't spoken about, so please let us know in the comments on YouTube, or hit us up on Twitter and kind of follow us at G4A Network or at Eat Sleep Game. And you can also follow Matt at Matt P Video. Is that right, Matt?
That's the tag on all the things.
And let us know what some of your favorite PlayStation games are, what some of the best ones you think are. Let's, put it this way. If one of your friends was getting into PlayStation right now for the first time, what are the 3 games that you would tell them to play? Come on, you know what these games are, because there are some great ones.
Last of Us 1, Last of Us 2, God of War, done.
For sure. So you've had it from us. God of War 2018. We consider that the best PlayStation game ever. Maybe a little bit predictable, but it deserves it, I feel like. And
Definitely.
yeah, we will see you next time. Matt will obviously be back in about 4 weeks. I have no idea what we'll be talking about yet. But tune in to find out. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.